When I first worked as a psychiatric nurse, the first ward I worked in was an accident victim ward. Why have we got accident victims in a psychiatric hospital? Because their brain has been damaged. And yet God did a good job putting a very hard skull there. And yes, it is true, it is such a strong skull that if he's hit very badly and there is a dent there, it can certainly damage. And we've got that wonderful story that my grandchildren love, David and Goliath. This young boy taking on Goliath ran down and took 5 stones. Goliath, when he saw David, he was angry that they'd sent this young boy, this young strapling. And in his anger, you know what he did? Pushed his helmet back. And the stone went there. And when it went there, it embedded into his skull because, if you know the story, David, he'd already killed a lion with his sling. He'd already killed a bear with his sling, looking after his sheep. God was preparing him. The whole of the Israelite army was afraid. But this young boy, why wasn't he afraid? Because he had surrendered his whole life to God. And God gave him the ability not to be afraid. And it's beautiful what he says to Goliath. He says, "You come to me with a sword and a shield, but I come to you in the name of the Lord God of hosts." But isn't it interesting? If Goliath hadn't got angry, he wouldn't have pushed his helmet back. And there wouldn't have been a little spot for that stone to go to. What did the stone hit? Let me show you what it hit. Here is the brain from side on. Here is the brain from top down. And if you look at the brain, it's almost like a walnut. And the 2 lobes at the front is called the prefrontal cortex. And it is the prefrontal cortex where our intellect resides, where our judgment takes place, where our reasoning powers reside. This is intellect. Can you see what's happening in the prefrontal cortex? This is where our debates happen. This is where judgment takes place. This is where our reasoning powers reside. But it is the 4th function of the prefrontal cortex that determines our destiny. In fact, it was this final one that determined the Jews that believed on Jesus, their testimony. That determined Pilate's testimony. Well, his testimony proved his destiny.